This video explains the ethnic and racial origins of the Pashtuns of Afghanistan and Pakistan and whose land they occupy in both countries. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. First, I'm going to tackle the question of who the Pashtuns are. I'm going to take a different approach than most researchers in arriving at my conclusion. The Bible in Genesis 10 provides the racial origins of all nations after Noah's flood. We have a rough idea where most people settled, though over the millennia there has been a lot of racial mixing. That is true of the Afghans and people in Pakistan and India. As Genesis states, before Noah's flood, the world was saturated with violence and bloodshed due to interracial marriages. No one repented at Noah's preaching. So God drowned that world in a global flood, leaving only 8 persons alive. After the flood, to prevent violence and bloodshed, God gave Noah a colonization plan to separate humanity by race and spread out over the earth. A slight majority of humanity, led by Cush, a black man, his common law wife Semiramis, a white woman of the line of Japheth, and Nimrod, their black son, and Asher, ancestor of the ancient Assyrians and modern Germans, rebelled against that plan and set up their own civilization in the land of Shinar in modern Iraq. After the destruction of the Tower of Babel, God gave different branches of Noah's family a different language so that they could not understand the speech of a different race. As a result, they were forced to separate from each other by race as God had originally planned. That is how different nations originated after the flood. That division by race and language is indicated in the Bible in Genesis 10. Verses 2 to 5 show how different nations sprang from the different sons of Japheth, the son of Noah, according to their languages. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands. This shows that different tribes came from these patriarchs and separated into different lands, everyone according to his language. This proves that language has separated people according to their families and to their nations. Similarly, about the nations that sprang from Ham the son of Noah, Genesis 10 verses 6 to 8 and 13 to 18 and 20 state, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabtika. And the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begat Nimrod. The Bible does not call him a son, as he was born of an illegitimate relationship with Semiramis. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Mizraim begat Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Nephitushim, Pathrusim, and Casluhim, from whom came the Philistines and Caphtorim. Now Canaan begot Sidon his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, Amorite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. These were the sons of Ham according to their families and according to the languages in their lands and in their nations. Then Genesis 10 verses 21 to 29 and 31 to 32 state, and children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, meaning Hebrews, the brother of Japheth the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, father of the Iranians, Asher, the father of the Assyrians and the modern Germans, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram, father of the Syrians. The sons of Aram were Uz and Hul and Gedar and Mash. Arphaxad begot Selah, and Selah begot Eber. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, and in his days the earth was divided. This is when the confusion of language took place, leading to division of humanity. and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begat Almodad, Shelef, and Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. Now, these were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Now the entire earth was divided among these sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. To understand who the various descendants of each of these sons of Noah are, one must remember that Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were all white racially. Shem had married a white woman, Ham had married the African featured black Neama, and Japheth had married an oriental looking woman. But since Shem, Ham, and Japheth were racially white, all of Shem's children would be born white, whereas some of Japheth's children would be born white and some would be born oriental looking. Some would also be born mixed looking. In the same way, some of Ham's children would be born African black, meaning with curly hair. Some would be born black or shades in between, but with straight black hair like the Indians do, whereas others would be born swarthy white. There has also been racial mixing because of interracial marriages forced upon peoples by Cush and Nimrod in their rebellion against God and subsequently through the centuries. But the broad racial divisions of the earth are that descendants of Shem settled in Europe with subsequent migrations to North America, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. They are descended from Arphaxad, the son of Shem. Persians are the descendants of Elam, the son of Shem. But they are slightly darker than European whites because Elam married a swarthy white daughter of Ham and Neama. Asher apparently married a white daughter of Japheth, and his descendants are the Germans. The Syrians are the descendants of Aram, the son of Shem. Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, but they have quite heavily mixed with dark peoples. In addition, Ishmael's mother Hagar was an Egyptian, and he himself married an Egyptian. Turks are the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, but he married an Ishmaelite, meaning an Arab woman, and two Canaanite women. Canaan was the son of Ham, hence Turks are generally darker looking than other Europeans. Jacob or Israel is the ancestor of the British and American peoples, the Jews, and the northwestern European nations. Jews have generally mixed with the peoples of the nations in which they have lived. Now, Bible historians know that the white, Slavic, and Russian peoples are descendants of Japheth, whereas all Oriental peoples are also descendants of Japheth. Some of Japheth's descendants who had joined Cush and Nimrod in the rebellion were forced to racially mix with Cush's black descendants. That's why some Chinese, Tibetans, Nepalese, Malaysians, Indonesians, and Filipinos are darker in color. Most people in Latin America are also descendants of Japheth, though mixed with other races. Egypt is known as the land of Ham because that is where Mizraim, the son of Ham, settled. Egypt's other name was Mizr, derived from Mizraim. Mizraim was a swarthy white individual. His descendants are the Copts in Egypt, the lightest in color among the Egyptians. Now, Cush means black, as Ethiopia also means black. So Cush is Ethiopia because that is where Cush settled with his descendants after he was forced out of Babylon. Canaan, the son of Ham, settled in what is today the Holy Land till ancient Israel killed most of them because of their evils and the rest fled. Put, the son of Ham, settled in what is Libya today. Africa is where the other descendants of Ham settled. However, not all of Ham's descendants settled in Africa and Canaan. Those who settled in Africa had the curly hair of the Africans, but some of Ham's descendants were born dark-skinned but with straight hair because Ham himself was white. This trait also continued in the next generation. Thus, two kinds of people were born to Cush, the son of Ham. One kind had curly hair and settled in Ethiopia. Another branch of his family had straight hair and migrated in the easterly direction from Babylon, where the confusion of languages took place, ultimately settling in India. The reason they were forced to separate from each other was that they received different languages at the time of the destruction of the Tower of Babel. Similarly, while the descendants of Phut with the curly hair settled in Libya, those with the dark hair settled in Rajasthan, India, and are known as the Rajputs. Now, Noah trained the descendants of Arphaxad, the son of Shem, to be priests of the true religion as taught by him. But because of massive financial incentives given by Semiramis, Cush, Nimrod, and Asher, they became perverted, gave up the true religion, and began teaching the false religion of Nimrod and Semiramis. They were the priests in Egypt, Babylon, Italy, in Europe, and to the Indians. They were forced to mix racially with the people among whom they lived. Their descendants in India are known as the Brahmins. As the human family was growing, initially most of the rebels lived around Babylon in the land of Shinar, but they would not move away and separate as God had asked them to do. But when the Assyrians began subjugating various peoples and imposing tribute on them, with their practice being to require all people to bring tribute annually to their capital Nineveh. If they failed to do so, the Assyrians attacked them and dealt brutally with them. The only way various tribes could find a relief from the ever increasing demands and oppression of the Assyrians was to move away from Babylon. Then weather related events and wars with other peoples forced them to move. Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, says they moved to lands where God led them, according to the colonization plan he had given to Noah. But these migrations took place over centuries and even millennia in some cases. The earliest settlers of India were the descendants of Cush and Phut. They came from Babylon in modern Iraq by the overland route that passes through Iran and Afghanistan. They were pushed out of the area around Babylon by the brutal Assyrians, who apparently called themselves Deutsch at that time. The Assyrian brutality has given words to the North Indian languages derived from the word Deutsch, such as Dushman, from Deutschman, which means deadly enemy, Dushmani, which means enmity, usually long lasting, Dosh, which means accuse, also used in the sense of falsely accused, which the Germans excel in, Doshi, which means guilty, Dusht, which means the meanest individuals who wants to take away even what you need for your barest survival. Then Dant or Datya, which means demonic individual. All these words have come into the vocabulary of North Indian languages because some time ago their ancestors were subject to the Assyrians, and these are the words that fitly describe the Assyrians based on their dealings with ancestors of the Indians and other subject peoples. Since Indians, known as Kassites, derived from the word Kushites and its derivative name Kshatriya, meaning of the warrior caste, they passed through Iran, that is, who are descendants of Elam, and they had interactions and conflicts with Iranians. Some of the Igi Halkids dynasty that ruled from 1400 to 1210 BC in Iran married the Kassite princesses. That explains why some Iranians are darker in color and look like North Indians. Now, as the Kassites were being pushed east, there were conflicts with the Elamites or Persians as well as the Assyrians. Kassites invaded Iran, and the Kassites' king Kurigalzu II temporarily occupied Elam around 1320 BC. Before that, the Bible mentions Chushan Rishathaim in Judges 3 verses 8 to 10, who was king of Mesopotamia. This then was an Indian who had won a war with the Assyrians and briefly ruled over them in Mesopotamia, as well as in Elam around 1349 BCE. The upshot of this information is that the Persians and North Indians came into conflict often about control of territory that is now Afghanistan. That is why a mountain range in Afghanistan is named Hindu Kush, because Indians lived there and ruled there. All of Afghanistan was Indian territory at one time till about 1200 BC or perhaps 1000 BC. Later, two prominent Indian kingdoms were located in what is now Afghanistan, Gandhara and Cambodia kingdoms. Many Kambodjas now live in India. Now, north of the Indian kingdoms migrated other people descended from the patriarch Abraham through his sons by his wife Keturah. The Bible mentions the sons of Keturah in 1 Chronicles chapter 1 verses 32 to 33. Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, she bare Zimran and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. And the sons of Jokshan, Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher. And Hanok and Abida and Eldah. All these are the sons of Keturah. Now Abraham gave gifts to all of them and sent them towards the east from the Holy Land to separate them from his son Isaac. The Turks are the descendants of Esau or Edom, the grandson of Abraham and son of Isaac and brother of Jacob, the father of the Israelite tribes. Besides Turkey and later some parts of Europe, some of them migrated towards the east and have given their name to Turkmenistan. The Amu Darya takes its name from Amalek, a grandson of Esau. These people also settled north of the Indian kingdoms, meaning north of Afghanistan. They would have come into conflict with descendants of Japheth, who were settling in what is now China and central and eastern Russia and southern Russia, and racially mixed with them. Later coming into conflict and mixing with the people of Persian, Indian, Turkic and Abrahamic origin through his wife Keturah were the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel and the tribe of Judah, or the Jews, after their captivity and deportation from their lands. After the dissolution of the Assyrian Empire at the hands of the Babylonians and Medes in 612 BCE, the captive Israelites and the Jews among them gained their independence and wandered in the vast steppes of Eurasia. In history, they have been known by various names such as the Scythians or Sakas, Parthians, Hephthalite Huns, and Yuezhi by the Chinese. The Jews from the tribe of Judah mainly, with some from the tribes of Levi and Benjamin, came to North India in 2 waves, and their modern descendants can be easily identified. Besides taking the northern 10 tribes captive and removing them from their land, 10 years later the Assyrians also took many Jews captive and put them all together. After the Assyrian Empire was uprooted from Mesopotamia, which means the land between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, these captives received their freedom and wandered the steppes of Eurasia. The descendants of the Jews among them intermarried with Indians and are today known as the Jats, who are Hindus, or Jats, who are Sikhs. About 50% of the Jats live in Pakistan and had converted to Islam. About 35% living in India converted to Sikhism, and about 15% of their descendants converted to Hinduism and are known as the Jats. Now, about 135 years after the Assyrian captivity of the northern 10 tribes, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took the remaining Jews in the southern kingdom of Judah captive, removed them from their land and settled them in the provinces of Babylon. Later, the Persians and Medes defeated the Babylonians and absorbed the entire Babylonian Empire into the Persian Empire. Cyrus the Great of Persia made a decree to allow the Jews in the kingdom to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple and restore the Jewish worship system. But only about 15% of the Jews went back. The descendants of these Jews are known as Jews around the world today because they have maintained their identity. The vast majority of the remaining Jews did not return to Jerusalem or Israel. Many of their descendants had settled in Iran and North India. In North India today, they are known as Sani, Sani, Soni, and Soni, Sani being the generic name. Though many now use different gotras, that is subcastes, such as Khosla, Banga, Chandok, Banwait, Badwal, Chaudhry, etc., as their last names. It seems none of the Sainis converted to Islam. Today, about half of them are Hindus and half of them are Sikhs. The fact that the Assyrians placed the descendants of the northern 10 tribes and the Jews they took captive together means that we should expect to find the Jats living among the modern descendants of the 10 tribes. This means that most of the Punjabi Brahmins and Kshatriyas living in North India are descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel mixed with the North Indian Brahmins and Kshatriyas through intermarriages. The Jats live among them. Now, there are many competing theories about the racial and ethnic origins of the Pashtuns, which include 1. East Iranian origin, 2. Descent from the 10 tribes of Israel, 3. Descent from the Pashtuns, an ancient people referenced to in Sanskrit and Greek sources who inhabited what is today southeastern Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, and D. Descent from the ancient Greeks and Rajputs. Some Pashtun tribes claim descent from Arabs, others from Greeks who came with Alexander, or Greeks brought as slaves by the Persian Emperor Xerxes, while some claim descent from the Turks. It seems that whoever passed through or ruled the land, some Pashtun tribes would claim descent from those people. While a few may be descendants of such mixed races, the reasons for such claim is, in some cases, may simply be desire to claim lofty descent from an ancient conqueror who conquered the land and ruled it. The 10 tribes of Israel in the region were known by different names such as Scythians, Saka, Parthians, and Hephthalite Huns, who ruled Afghanistan and interacted with Afghans over a period of about 1,000 years. The Pashtuns were in charge of all elephants that were used in battlefields. That indicates an Indian origin from them. Clearly, Pashtuns in the Paktia province have Indian blood in them. So it should be clear that white people don't become black over the centuries due to the weather or vice versa. White people become darker due to racial mixing. Clearly, the Pashtuns are a mixed group. There are about 60 major tribes and between 350 to 400 total tribes, sub-tribes, and clans among the Pashtuns, with differences among themselves. Pashtuns are really a tribal confederation. That is why modern scholars correctly suggest that the Pashtuns do not have a singular origin. They are a highly mixed bunch. Now, mitochondrial DNA analysis of Pashtuns shows that a majority of them share a great affinity with West Eurasian covering Europe, southern Russia, Turkey, Lebanon, and Israel, and Central Asian, meaning Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, Central Asian populations, rather than to populations of South Asia or East Asia. In 2019, a study on autosomal STR profiles of the populations of South and North Afghanistan showed that Afghans have a genetic affinity with countries of the Near East, countries of the Arabian Peninsula, Cyprus, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestinian territories, Syria, and Turkey. The DNA suggests that a majority of Pashtuns have a Middle Eastern, or most specifically an East Iranian origin mixed with Turks. Now let's examine the claims that the Pashtuns are the descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Those scholars who agree with this view assume that the 10 tribes came to Afghanistan and completely mingled with the local population through intermarriages and were subsumed in the Afghan population. Therefore, they are no longer recognizable as the 10 tribes of Israel anywhere else. That view is absolutely incorrect. The scholars who surmise that the 10 tribes completely mixed with other people simply don't understand that only a small portion in the population of the Sakas, Scythians, Parthians, and Hephthalite Huns mixed with the local populations. Vast majority did not mix with other races and remained racially white, and later, due to climate change and conflict with people in the east, migrated to the British Isles and northwestern European countries of France, Switzerland, Ireland, Scandinavian, and Benelux countries, and later to America and British Commonwealth nations. Therefore, the number of the 10 tribes of Israel mixed with the Afghans is very small, if any. Now, God had prophesied that after removal from the ancient land of Israel, he would sift the house of Israel, meaning the 10 tribes, through the nations, but not a single grain would fall. This is in Amos 9:9. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the ground. After sifting the house of Israel among many nations, he finally brought them to the British Isles, Europe, and later into America and other British Commonwealth nations. Now, for proof, you may read United Church of God booklet, The United States and Britain and Bible Prophecy, at www.ucg.org, Bible Study Tools. Now, some very small mixing of the 10 tribes in the Afghan population is indicated by the name Yusuf Zai, meaning sons of Yusuf or Joseph. In my previous view, because of this connection and because of the understanding that the tribes of Israel roamed the lands that are Afghanistan today, as well as the steppes of Eurasia of 4th centuries, I tended to believe that the Pashtuns or Israelites mixed with local people, because we know the Jats and Chinese are Jews mixed with the local people in North India. But my further research, as described here, has led to a change in my opinion. In addition, Yusuf Zai may have come from the Arab word for Yusuf or Joseph, which could have been just the Muslim name of the Arab or Iranian ancestor of the tribe. Muslims use the name Yusuf or Joseph, as he is considered a prophet in the Quran. Now, as already mentioned, the Jews who mix with the North Indians are easily identifiable as the Jats, a word derived from Judah, and Sinese, which is Punjabi language, means a person from Sion, which is another name for Jerusalem. Now, since the Jats are described from the laws, they were carried as captives from the Jews, who were carried as captives by the Assyrians and were placed among the 10 tribes. This shows that the other North Indians, that is Punjabis and Pakistanis, except the Pashtuns, are descendants of the 10 tribes mixed with the local Indian population. The Jews are easily identifiable among North Indian Punjabis, but they simply cannot be identified in the same way in Afghanistan. Those Jews who had settled in Afghanistan and were recognized as Jews descended from the Jews who went back to Jerusalem and Israel after King Cyrus's edict, but were then displaced from the land of Israel by the Romans. The Jews who did not go back to Jerusalem after Cyrus's edict and the Jews who were held captive with the 10 tribes are not recognizable anywhere in Afghanistan, as they are in India as the Jats and Chinese. In my opinion, what really took place is that while all of Afghanistan was Indian territory till about 1200 BC or even up to 1000 BC, as populations expanded, East Iranians began encroaching on their territory through warfare. They became known as the Pashtuns. because of their language Pashto, which is of East Iranian origin. Thus, the language, DNA studies, and various invasions from East Iran indicate a primarily East Iranian origin for the Pashtuns, but some mixture with the Pakhtas, Gandharas, and Kambodjas had occurred. Later to that mix, the 10 tribes of Israel were added, particularly after 612 BCE, destruction of the Assyrian Empire. Till about 1000 AD, Indians held on to part of Afghanistan in the Gandhara kingdom. Kandahar takes its name from that kingdom, whereas the Cambodia kingdom lasted till about 100 BCE, before they migrated to other parts of India. Those who claim that the Pashtuns are descendants primarily of the 10 tribes of Israel state that it is an irony that the vast majority of Pashtuns themselves reject their origin from the Jews and the 10 tribes of Israel. I believe it is not an irony. The Pashtuns are by and large right in their belief. They are primarily of East Iranian origin. Now, after their defeat and captivity at the hands of the Assyrians, the 10 tribes of Israel roamed the steppes of Eurasia, which resulted their cattle grazing and agricultural economy. But other people already lived in those territories. Though there was enough land and resources for the populations at that time, conflict invariably develops between different people. Some Israelite tribes moved into area known as Afghanistan, but because of better agricultural land, Israelites moved further east and south into the fertile plain of Punjab. That is why we find the Jats, Sainis, and descendants of the other tribes of Israel in the greater Punjab area, consisting of Punjab states in Pakistan and India, and the states of Kashmir, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, and Uttarakhand. That is another reason I believe most of the Israelites and Jews moved on into India and mixed with the local population, though they came back by Afghanistan. There are two broad ways of life. One is working with your own two hands to make a living. The other is the way of conquest and enslaving other people, plundering their wealth, or putting them to tribute and ruling over them. The Amalekites, descendants of Esau, who gave their name to the Amu Darya, epitomize that way of life. In the Bible, other traits of the Amalekites include attacking and killing the vulnerable and treachery. Pashtuns seem to have picked up those traits from the Amalekites. Even the Elamites, ancestors of Iranians, had the trait of conquering people and imposing tribute on them in the days of Abraham soon after the flood, as mentioned in Genesis 14 verses 1 to 4. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. Here Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, had conquered the 5 kings of the Canaanites and put them to tribute. When the Canaanite kings did not bring tribute in the 13th year, they were attacked by Chedorlaomer and his Assyrian allies and looted. Abraham's nephew Lot and his family were taken captive to be enslaved. Abraham then mounted a rescue mission in which he slew the 3 kings of the Assyrians and Chedorlaomer, the king of Edom. Over the centuries, Iranians and Afghans have invaded India to loot, plunder, enslave, and rule over the Indians. That's why I now believe that though there are some Israelites mixed among the Afghans, their percentage is small. In contrast, those descended from the Israelites, particularly Judah, have settled wherever they could find any kind of land which no one else was putting to use for agriculture. That is why they seem to have ended up in Punjab. In my own lifetime, during the 1950s and early 60s, there was common land available for agriculture. Even in the past few decades, they have belonged to mountainous and forested areas of Uttarakhand and UP, desert of Rajasthan, Ganganagar, Madhya Pradesh, and even in Gujarat, and started agriculture there. That is true of the British and what they did in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and other British colonies. In fact, their agricultural practices increased grain production so much that it supported explosive growth in population possible in former colonies, which presumably used to experience famines regularly and do not grow much in population. Unfortunately, for any nation to deal with other nations, it should take no difference. It should make no difference whether you are Israelite or Jewish or not. What matters is how you behave and what you have done. Here is an example. I believe most of white Americans, including most of German descent, whose ancestors came to the USA centuries ago, are of Israelite descent. As mentioned earlier, God had prophesied that after removal from the ancient land of Israel, he would sift the house of Israel, the 10 tribes, through the nations, but not a single grain would fall. So Amos 9:9. For lo, I will command and I will sift the house of Israel among the nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall from the earth. But the lost 10 tribes became lost because they lost their identity. God had told the Israelites that the Sabbath would be a sign between him and his people. The Jews are recognized as Jews because they keep the Sabbath. The 10 tribes lost their identity because they gave up keeping the Sabbath when they separated from the nation of Israel after the death of Solomon. Since the tribes of Israel were slaves of the Assyrians, it's quite likely that some of them settled among the German tribes in what is Germany today, particularly of the tribe of Manasseh. When America was being colonized by Europeans, mainly the people in the early days, some even areas of Britain and even Germany emptied out and emigrated to the United States. This indicates that God guided the migration of the descendants of Manasseh, as Manasseh in the end days was to become the great nation among the tribes of Israel from the nations of Europe, and by and large they had lived separately even in Germany and Britain. God had prophesied that not the least grain would fall as he sifted them through the nations. But living for 2.5 millennia among the Germans changed their thinking, and they imbibed the satanic philosophies of the Germans. That's why in the United States, when after World War II, Americans of German descent cast in their lot with the soldiers and decided to take over the country for Germany and themselves. They were guided by Satan the devil and committed the most terrible atrocities ever imaginable, such as cremating 5 to 6 million white Americans of non-German ancestry alive in electric crematoriums, medically murdering 3 to 4 million more, torturing the elderly in nursing homes by tying their hands to their chairs for long periods of time, with threats forcing many people to marry interracially, and more trouble. Atrocities and more horrible atrocities that would turn anyone's stomach so that they cannot be described here. But their goal has not changed. Their nature has not changed. They still obey Satan the devil and consider him to be a superior God than the creator God of the Bible. So what should be the judgment on them? The appropriate judgment for them is to be exterminated, man, woman, and child. But for all the crimes they have committed and continue to commit, I will continue to supply enzymes. The only appropriate judgment for them is to be exterminated, man, woman, and child, for all the crimes they have committed and continue to commit. That is the reason why I have indicated in my video of August 27, 2021, titled Urgent Warning to Germany, China, India, Iran, and the Taliban about the start of the Third World War, about how the Pashtuns or Afghanistan should be dealt with if they attack North India. Their power should be utterly destroyed so that they are unable to wage war against North India for the next 50 years at least. What should be done to them should be what they plan to do if they win the war, regardless of whether they have Israelite blood in them or not. Now, here is a brief outline of Afghanistan history to show that Persia has had the most interaction with Afghanistan, particularly over the past 1500 years, indicating that most of the Pashtuns are primarily of East Iranian origin. It is important to understand the chronologies of the various kingdoms and empires overlap, as they did not rule all of Afghanistan but parts only. Gandhara kingdom from 1500 BC to 518 BC, which was an Indian kingdom centered around the Peshawar and Swat valleys, but at times included Kabul and Bamiyan. Kamboja kingdom, it also included Kandahar. The Kamboja kingdom from 1200 BC to 300 BC, also an Indo-Iranian kingdom located northwest of the Gandhara kingdom. After the disintegration of their empire, they were assimilated into the local population, whereas the remaining migrated to India. The Achaemenid Empire, a Persian empire from 550 to 330 BC. Greek Empire of Alexander and the Seleucids from 313 to 304 BC. The Mauryan Empire from 322 to 184 BC, which was an Indian empire. The Greco-Bactrian Empire from 250 to 130 BCE. Indo-Greek Kingdom from 200 to 10 BCE to 10 CE. Indo-Scythians from 150 BCE to 400 Common Era. Indo-Parthians from 19 CE to 226 Common Era. The Kushan Empire from 30 to 375 CE. The name Kushan is derived from Kush, the ancestor of the Dark Indians. From their origins in northwestern China, it is quite clear that these people were descendants of Kush mixed with the Chinese descendants of Magog, because their ancestor Kush and his son Nimrod were forcibly mixing the races. Then the Sassanid Empire from 224 to 651 CE, which was an Iranian empire. Then the Hunas or Huns or Hephthalites or White Huns, approximately 370 AD to 528 AD. Only the White Huns were Israelites. The other Huns were a Mongol Turkic group. Now in the Middle Ages, from 560 CE to 1500 CE, during this period and even extending to 1750 of the Common Era, the eastern part of modern Afghanistan was considered a part of Indian empires, while western Afghanistan was included in Khorasan, which is northeastern part of Iran. Now, then the Arab Islamic conquest came of the Sasanian Empire in 642 CE and introduced Islam in the area. But eastern Afghanistan remained independent. Now, then the Safavid dynasty ruled from 861 to 1003 CE. This was a Sunni Persian dynasty ruled western Afghanistan, but also conquered the Hindu Shahi kingdoms of Kabul and Gandhara. Then the Ghaznavid dynasty from 977 to 1186 CE, which was a Persian Muslim dynasty of Turkic Mongol Mamluk origin. The Ghurrid dynasty from 1148 to 1215 CE, a dynasty of Iranian origin. Then the Mongols and Turks from 1221 to 1504 CE. They fused the Persian and Turkic cultures. Though the rulers were Mongols and Turks, they were ruling over an already established population of Eastern Iranian origin. Then the Safavid rule. Western Afghanistan reverted back to Persian rule, while Babur ruled eastern Afghanistan after having established Mughal rule in North India. From the 16th to the 17th centuries, Afghanistan was divided into three main areas. Western Afghanistan was ruled by the Iranian Shia Safavids. Eastern Afghanistan was ruled by the Sunni Mughals of North India, whereas northern Afghanistan was ruled by the Bukhara Khanate based in modern Uzbekistan. The Hotaki dynasty ruled from 1713 to 1738 BC, which was a Pashtun dynasty in Kandahar, southern Rajasthan. Nader Shah, which was an Iranian ruler from 738 to 747 CE. The Durrani Empire from 747 to 1823 CE, who was a Pashtun leader. The Barakzai dynasty from 1823 to 1973 CE, which was a Pashtun dynasty. As this history shows, for about 1000 years, beginning in 1500 CE, the most important influence on Afghanistan has been Indian. Then Afghanistan came under Persian rule during the Medo-Persian Empire for about 220 years. After that, the Greeks held sway for 300 years, though eastern parts were ruled by the Indian Maurya Empire. After that, Israelite tribes ruled parts of Afghanistan for about 375 years. Then the Indian origin Kushan Empire ruled for about 345 years, followed by Persian rule for nearly 430 years. Since about 860 CE, Persians ruled Afghanistan till about 1713 CE, when Pashtuns finally established their rule over Afghanistan, but primarily in western Afghanistan. Eastern Afghanistan was ruled by India-based rulers. Since Pashtuns are concentrated in west, south, and east of Afghanistan, it indicates a very mixed ethnicity, as also indicated by the existence of about 60 major tribes. But the ethnicity of rulers indicates that a vast majority of the Pashtun population is of East Iranian origin, while the East Afghanistan Pashtuns population has some Indian blood mixed in it, though the Pashtuns in Pakistan are likely to have more Indian blood mixed in them than in Afghanistan. This history of Afghanistan shows that all the land of Afghanistan originally belonged to ancestors of those who live in India. Then Persian conquest began. However, till about 550 BCE, Indians still maintained their Kandahar kingdom and the Cambodia kingdom till about 300 BCE in eastern Afghanistan, all the way south to Kandahar. Indians later established the Kushan Empire. The Maurya Empire also ruled eastern and southeastern Afghanistan. Even from 560 CE to about 1710 CE, eastern Afghanistan has for most of the time been ruled by India-based rulers. Now, over the centuries, Iranians have been pushing eastwards into Afghanistan by warfare and conquest, and from there pushing people into India. The Pashtuns are primarily of East Iranian origin. They occupy much of the land that belonged to Indians. Based on control of the land in the past, the lands of the former Gandhara and Cambodia kingdoms in Afghanistan should belong to India. But after more than 300 years of occupation by Pashtuns in Afghanistan, that does not seem reasonable. But I believe God made a judgment through the British Empire by settling the boundaries for Afghanistan and Indians as they are currently constituted. Therefore, boundaries should not be moved by claiming any territory that is in Afghanistan or belongs to others. Of course, the Pashtuns have no qualms about pushing people out of their lands and occupying them, which is what they did in Kashmir and what they now plan to do by attacking North India in collaboration with Pakistan, Iran, other Indians, and the Chinese, all orchestrated by the Germans. Therefore, I would like to add another warning to the Pashtuns. If you attack us to take over our land, we will not move boundaries, but we will expel you from the lands that you occupy in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is where all Pashtuns belong. But this will be done only in retaliation if you attack us to expand your territory. You have continued to abuse the hospitality of Indians over the millennia who allowed you to live among them, and then you try to establish your rule over them. This will no longer be absorbed, allowed, or tolerated. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. You can also find the text of my videos on my Facebook channel.